Good morning. The word for today comes from Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 to 31. And this is wisdom personified. She is speaking, and this is what wisdom says. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills, I was brought forth. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. When he made firm the skies above. When he established the fountains of the deep. When he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him, like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. This is the word of the Lord. Amen. You may be seated. Let me remind you of what the Epistle of James has as its purpose. What's the central reason for why James wrote it? What are we to be getting out of it? The purpose of this book, if I could condense it down into 3 words, is be spiritually pure. Later in James, he talks about cleansing your hearts, purifying your hearts, you double-minded. Purity in the Epistle of James is about being unmixed. It's about being a person who has a singular focus, and it's on Jesus of Nazareth. A singular goal, and that is to build the kingdom of Jesus here, to make this place brighter and better, and for that reason to be found faithful when Jesus does come to call us home. The purpose of this epistle is to make spiritually pure people. So if you're just tuning in, if you're just visiting, this is only week number 3. And so there's so much more in this. I think it will be a rich study. I think it will be an encouraging study. And so I just invite you and welcome you to be with us, to continue to be with us as we grow together. You know, we read a moment ago from the Proverbs, and the Proverbs deal with wisdom, having wisdom. Being a person who's wise, you have knowledge, you know how to engage in certain circumstances. You know when to open your mouth and when to keep it closed. And when you open your mouth, you know what to say. You know the kinds of actions that will steer you off course, and so you live accordingly. You have purposes and goals, and you know what's needed to get there. You know how to glorify God. You know how to be a witness that is of Christ before your neighbors. We're talking about wisdom. The sermon this morning is a divine invitation to be wise. James is telling us we are to be wise. We are to have wisdom. And I must say that in the world today, as you listen, there's a lot of noise. Isn't there? There's a lot of noise, and there are many talking heads, and there are pundits with catchy jabs and one-liners. And there are persons of intellect who can describe in perfect detail every muscle and every bone in the human body. And there are scientists who can describe the physics of gravity, and they understand it well. There are scholars with all kinds of specialized degrees in medicine and engineering and computer science. And there are so-called or self-acclaimed experts in virtually every field, all of them with a megaphone, all of them on a platform, all of them saying, "Look at me." The noise in this age of media, and media has a lot to do with it. It gives a platform to anybody. But the noise in this age of media, I think, is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. It's a cacophony. It's just constant. It's coming from every direction. There's so much noise, and there are so many competing voices, all of whom are vying for a slice of the attention pie. They're saying, look my way, see what I have here, listen to what I have to tell you about your future, your founding fathers, that red meat that you've been eating, cow flatulence, global emissions, that pharmaceutical thing that you need so badly in order to avoid the apocalypse that our CEO invented. The most needed thing in this world of noise is also the thing that I find to be most absent. News stations have the ability to be broadcasting virtually 24 hours a day. It's an endless cycle, 24/7. There's a lot of content. There is a lot of knowledge. There are a number of facts. There is a lot of fake news even. And there are many things being said, but in the noise and in all of the things that are being said, I see, and I would imagine that you also see, very little wisdom. When was the last time you heard somebody speak from a public platform where you walked away and you said, that person has wisdom, not just rhetoric? Wisdom, not just some statements to make. The thing this world needs desperately is wisdom. There is shrewdness. I see shrewdness all the time. I think there is craftiness. There is even a lot of times, or sometimes, a kind of sophistry. But what the world is missing and so badly needs is the wisdom that James says comes down from above, which is first pure. This epistle is about purity. It's about being unmixed. It's unmixed. It doesn't care about what this faction or this group says. It's not looking for those as its main indicators. The wisdom that comes down from above, which is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And so that's James 3:17. My question for you this morning is, where is the sage? Where is the wise person? Where's the one to whom you can turn for good counsel? There are many problems that exist. Where do you go? Where do you find a person to give you wisdom? In 1 Chronicles 12 and verse 32, when David's kingdom was about to be set up there in Israel, it says that David, there's this whole chapter on David's mighty men. And a lot of these were warriors. These were strong men. They were men of courage. They were men of valor. Men, if you want to boost your testosterone a little bit, go read 1 Chronicles chapter 12. I think it's a good place to go. I think men need to be like this, but they were not just men who could wield a sword. They were not just men who were strong and able to defend. They didn't just have courage and valor. David needed those things, but also it says that David was surrounded by the men from Issachar, 1 Chronicles 12 and verse 32, who it says had an understanding of the times. They had an understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. What should we do? Well, they had an understanding, and it was a godly understanding, and David was surrounded by them in order to go forward. What I'm saying is, and I suppose that this is an appeal to develop that kind of sage-like wisdom and advice, to be an advisor to a person who is an important role, to be a person who can speak, and when you speak, the words of God come forth, and the words of God and the knowledge of God knows how to interact with various circumstances. So that's what this sermon is really about, and it's a divine invitation for us to be wise. Now, the good news this morning is that the wisdom of God is given freely, and it is freely available for the taking. But it does come at a great cost. The wisdom of God is freely available, but it comes at a great cost. Hear the word of the Lord through James. James says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask from God who gives to all freely and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith without wavering, for the one who wavers is like a wave of the sea, driven by the wind and tossed here and there. For that man must not think that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-souled man, unstable in all of his ways. So this is the word for this morning. And my purpose this morning is twofold. Number one is to give you a kind of confidence in the promise that's given here. I want for you to see the unprecedented availability of the wisdom of God. It's a gift and a blessing and a treasure that is available that's really unmatched, not only in its value, but also in its presence. It's here for the taking, and there are a few things in Scripture that are promised to us as certainly and as absolutely as this. So I want for you to see that, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And then I will expose the challenge in acquiring it. Because there's a reason why something that is so amazingly present and available, and yet there are so few people that possess it. So that's the outline for this morning. I want for you to see the availability first. And it's right here is where James speaks to this. This is James chapter 1 and verse 5. And I'm going to run through 5 points briefly here about the availability of this. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask from God, who gives to all freely and without reproach, and it will be given to him. The first point, he says, first of all, he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, and that's one of those, that's a rhetorical condition. I would say, since we all do lack wisdom in various spheres. So it's a given that we need wisdom, that we might have knowledge, we might have expertise, we might have facts, but wisdom is something that we can all always grow in. So if anybody lacks wisdom, let him ask from God. So this is, my first point that I want for you to see is, let him ask from God. And the interesting thing about this is that it's kind of softly, this is my own translation of it. I deliberated between translating it, let him or he must ask, because it is a Greek imperative. This is actually a command. And the idea behind it is that we need to ask for it. And in particular, not just needing to ask for it, but we must ask for it from God. That's the first point. If you're lacking in wisdom, you must ask for it, and you must ask for it from God. That word that he used, that's important. You must ask from God. He doesn't say you must ask from Google. And I just wonder, where is your source? And I look, God brings his wisdom in so many different ways. It would be hard to enumerate the many paths in which wisdom is received. I do believe that God can work through something as foolish as Google for providing an answer. Perhaps there's a site that has an answer. There's 4 billion sites that have the wrong answer. So it would be a miracle for you to find it that way. The point that I'm making is that if God is going to use a means like that, the way he will do it is if we first go to him. What expert, what resource are we using first? Are we going first to God to say, God, I need your wisdom, I need your counsel, and I don't frankly know where to turn. I want your advice. And James says, if you're lacking it, you must ask God. This is very simple. But if you're lacking it, you need to go to God and say, God, give to me wisdom. That's point number one. Point number two is, notice what it says here. He gives to all. You see that? He gives to all. That means everybody. If you're a person and you go to God and you ask for wisdom, God doesn't say, well, I can't give you wisdom in this area because you don't have a degree in that area. I can't give you wisdom on the difference between male and female because you don't have a degree in biology. God's not going to say that. That's not how it works. If you go to God, irrespective of what your prior accolades are, it says that he gives to all. God gives to everyone who asks. And this is why one of the things that's interesting is you may have, perhaps just imagine an uneducated peasant woman and a rocket scientist beside her. She may have far more wisdom than he. In fact, oftentimes that is the case. And the reason why is because God gives wisdom to all. The point James is making, in contrast to what he says in chapter 2, is that the church there had begun to become respecters of persons. They would see this person and give special attention, and this person and not give as much attention. God isn't a respecter of persons like that. It says that he gives to all. Number 3, it says that he gives to all freely. Right there. This is point number 3. He gives to all freely. Maybe your version says he gives to all generously. This is the only time in the New Testament that this word is used. It's used one time. I don't think that the word means generously. In fact, most of the Greek lexicons and Greek dictionaries would say that's not what it means. It doesn't just mean generously. It's not talking about some heaping up of it. The point and the word that he's using means God gives singly. He gives unwaveringly. The idea is that God gives without a question to the other side. He doesn't stop to think, well, should I do? No, he just gives it. I mean, the word means to give in a completely straightforward way. Basically, the point is there's no red tape. I hope that you're seeing this picture. God gives it. He gives it to everybody. He gives it freely. God's not saying, oh, nope, you don't meet this certain requirement, and God is not holding back in any respect. It says that God gives freely, God gives singly, God gives without a second thought. There are no questions asked. Number 4, it says that God gives, let me change my color here, God gives without reproach. Now, that means that he doesn't give in a disparaging way. He doesn't give in a mocking way. The fact is, we have all been foolish at times. Perhaps you are making foolish decisions now. Maybe you have been foolish for your whole life. Maybe even you are right now in a fool's predicament. The consequences that would result from foolish behavior. You can think, poor financial decisions, criminal charges, marital failings, lawsuits, drunken consequences, these kinds of things. Perhaps this is you, and you're in this situation. If you go to God and you ask for wisdom from God, it says he gives without disparaging. The idea is he gives without mocking. God, he doesn't look on you and think, oh, no, but you've been a fool until this point. He doesn't look and say, oh, now you're wanting wisdom. You should have listened to me at first. It says he gives without disparaging. He gives without mocking. He just gives it. God is going to give the wisdom because it is his delight to do it. And number 5, I'm going to change my color one more time. Notice what it says here at the end of verse 5. It will be given to him. Now, that is a future indicative. That verb that he uses, that means that this is something that is going to happen absolutely. It's a fact. It's not it's not just a hypothetical. It's not like there's a maybe, it's not like there might be. The point is that this is something that is absolutely going to happen. It's going to be given. Now, so let's just think about this for a moment. This is a certainty, and the thing that will be certainly given is wisdom. I want you to get some perspective on that. He's saying, without question, absolutely, in the clearest terms, as a guarantee, it will be given. Full stop. That's a fact. And what will be given is wisdom. Now, the perspective that we need to have on this is the perspective that Solomon had of wisdom. Solomon said this in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 14 to 15. He says, "The gain from wisdom is better than the gain from silver, and her profit is better than gold. She," that is wisdom, "is more precious than jewels, and no thing you desire can compare with her." And this is a repeated theme through the Bible, where wisdom is held up as this treasure that is beyond compare. You can't even put them on the same ledger. There's zero comparison between them. The profit and the value of wisdom is a treasure that if you acquire it, it is supremely, eternally far greater than any physical thing that you could ever have. And so the point that I want you to see in the absolute certainty of gaining this is, you might be a person who spends your entire life chasing after physical things. Perhaps it's money, perhaps it's sex, some other kind of pleasure, the high from drugs, some kind of greed, some accolade. You might search for your whole life to get these things, and you very well might not get them, but even if you do get them, they are far inferior to this other thing that you can have absolutely, certainly, in the clearest kind of promise in all of the Bible. That's the perspective that I want for us to recognize, is that the availability of this treasure that will give you long life. The proverb says that riches is in her right hand, but it's the kind of riches for which you don't have to look around your back and say, who's coming up after me? It's the kind of riches and the kind of wealth that still allows you to sleep peacefully at night and to have true joy in your person. Wisdom is something that does make life better in the meantime, and it gives you a treasure and a value in pleasing your Creator. So this is the perspective that we need to have. Jesus said that the queen of Ethiopia, the queen of Sheba, she's going to rise up. This is what Jesus said. He said this 2,000 years ago, and I believe he would say the same thing right now. That the queen of Ethiopia will rise up in the judgment and will condemn this generation because she traveled from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, something greater than Solomon is here. His name is Jesus. And you and I have the fullness of the revelation of God. And there was this lady who traveled hundreds, even thousands of miles from where she was in Ethiopia to get to where King Solomon was, just to hear the wisdom of a flawed man. Now, it was a profound wisdom and a wisdom that came from God, and yet the wisdom that we have is a fuller measure and is of a clarity that even Solomon did not have. You and I have this. What James is saying, church, Christian, young man, young woman, y'all are at a turning point. You're making decisions right now. What James is saying is, as you look forward, the most important thing that you could have going forward is the wisdom from God. There's nothing else like it. So that puts that into perspective. Now, here's the question that I have. James 1:5 is a verse we've all heard our entire lives, many of us. Perhaps some it's new for you. But James 1:5, this passage about asking God and he will give the wisdom, is a verse that many of us have heard for our entire lives. So here's my question. My question is, with the unprecedented availability and the absolute promise of something like wisdom, why is it that in a nation where people vastly still profess the name of Jesus, that wisdom is such a rarity? Have you thought about this? Why is it that there's a gift and a treasure that far outweighs the value of gold, and it's certainly available, unlike gold, which we may never acquire even with our best efforts? Why is it that with such an availability, there is still such a lack of wisdom amidst all of the noise that we hear around us? And I will tell you what James says, because this is the answer. So those are my 5 points. This is my last point. The second half of the sermon is this. Listen to what he says. He says, "But let him ask in faith." If you go to God, God, maybe right now you're saying, God, you know what? I want that. I want that more than I want my degree. I want that more than I want that sports championship. I want that more than I want my promotion at work. I want that more than I want a big house. I want it more than I want that certain car. I want it more than I want to have a bunch of money for vacation time. I want wisdom above all. Maybe you see the value of it and you say, that's what I want. Well, then he says to you, but, and every time you see this word, this is such an important word to pay attention to because it throws doubt on the thing that was otherwise made most certain. He's just like, it's going to be given. God gives to everybody freely. He doesn't disparage. He gives without second thought. It will be given absolutely. And then he says, but let him ask in faith without wavering. For the one who wavers is like a wave of the sea driven by the wind and tossed here and there. For that man must not think that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-souled man, unstable in all his ways. Now, this word, just briefly, the reason I translated it double-souled is because that's literally what it is. It is the idea of being double-minded, but it has to do with having two internal natures. There's two men within you, and they are in conflict with one another. They are fighting against one another. So I'll just say that at the start of this. But this is where James gives the answer. He says, look, if there is to be a person who doesn't acquire this thing that's absolutely promised and freely available, it has to do with what he says right here. Now, what does he say? I would imagine that a passive reading, in fact, this is what I thought my whole life. When reading this, I thought, James is saying that when I go to God and I ask for wisdom, I just need to be completely confident that God's going to give it. That's what James means by asking in faith. And so I thought, so long as I'm totally certain and there's not even a tinge of doubt that maybe he won't give it to me right now or it won't come through in time, but so long as I have a complete and total confidence, then God will give it to me. But if there's even just a little bit of doubt, nope, I'm out, I'm fresh out of luck. I'm going to be one of those ones that's a fool. I'm not going to get the wisdom. I had thought that that's what he was saying. And I told the elders, and one of the things that I love about studying in this way is to be able to zoom in on a verse and to look at the whole context in which it exists and to spend a lot of time just looking at one section and pondering over it in a way that a passive reading wouldn't allow. And I don't think that's what James is saying. I don't think James is saying that you just need to have this total confidence in that moment of asking, and that's the basis. Let me ask you, let me say this. James says, if you're going to ask, he does say that you need to ask in a particular way. It's in faith. We do know that. If you're going to ask, it needs to be in faith. If it's not according to faith, then you won't be granted it. The question is, what does James mean by faith? Well, let me ask you this. In the epistle of James, what does James, in the context of James, mean by faith? Does James mean mere belief? Or does James mean faithful action? What did James say in James chapter 2 and verse 17 about faith? He says faith by itself, if it doesn't have works, is dead. He says, you believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and they shudder. In the book of James in particular, faith is about faithful action. It's about a person who puts their money where their mouth is. It's about a person who makes a profession with their mouth that their feet are going to follow through with. They're going to use their hands in a way that's consistent with what they say to God in prayer or in praise. In the book of James, faith is about faithful action. And James, in fact, right here in this verse tells us exactly what he means by asking in faith. He says, there's this little participial phrase right here, without wavering. There's 3 English majors in the room right now that are very excited that I just used the term participial phrase. But these are important. Participles are verbal adjectives. They describe in some adjectival, verbal way what it is that he'd said before. So if you're saying, what is it that you mean by this word faith right here? Well, then it's this. It means without wavering, for which there is further information. He says, here's exactly what I mean by that. By asking in faith, I mean not wavering. And then he goes on to describe a person whose life is like a sea billow. You've seen them. You've flown over them in airplanes. You've looked down at them. They're this way, then they're this way. They're driven by the wind. They're tossed to and fro. James describes it in this kind of way. And then he describes a person who is double-souled. He's not talking about a Christian who's faithfully walking with the Lord, striving toward eternity. That's the path that they're walking. And on occasion, there's a doubt. Look, if you're a human being who doesn't ever have any doubt, you're a perfect human being. And you don't need the blood of Jesus. That's not a single one of us. Every single person is going to have doubts along the way. Being a person of faith is about plowing forward with what we know deep on the inside, irrespective of what we see before us, regardless of how it is that we feel presently at the moment. James is talking about a person that asks in such a faith where there's a stability of character there. It's clear that this person is saying, God, I want your wisdom. And here's what it means to ask in a doubting, wavering kind of way, is to, when asking for wisdom, have a part of you that says, but I certainly hope that the wisdom I receive doesn't touch this area of my life. Because if it does, I don't think that I would like that. I don't think that I would want that. That's what James is saying. It's about, look, this Christian walk, and what James is after is the kind of spiritual purity that says, God, bring to me your wisdom. I want all of it. I've done my way. I walked that path. I've lived a life where I had a foot in the door and a foot out the door. I've sat on the fence. I didn't receive the fullness of your blessings in those ways. I've gotten myself in more heartache and more hardships by doing things my way. So I don't want to do it my way anymore. Being a person who asks in faith is a person who goes to God and says, God, grant to me your wisdom, whatever it is. Whatever it means. Even if it means radical transformation in my life. Even if it means getting out of this certain relationship that might keep me from being faithful to you. Even if it means adopting a brand new set of friends. Even if it means leaving behind this employment that doesn't give me the freedom to spend time with my family. Look, on the day when we all stand before the Lord and on the day when we're in eternity, a lot of the things we put the greatest value in will be the things that we don't ever think about again. Being a person who asks in faith is a person who's not wavering. You're not double-souled. You're not saying, God, give me wisdom, but don't give me this kind of wisdom. You're not saying, God, give me wisdom in this particular area of my life. A lot of times you'll hear people say, this might be a person who doesn't walk with the Lord. They're not deep in prayer. They're not connected to Jesus in close union with Him. But when it comes time for decision, maybe it comes time for a job, they'll go to God and say, God, give me wisdom in this point. Give me wisdom so that I can know whether I should take this job. Or he's saying if you're a double-souled person, he says you can't expect to receive anything from the Lord. And you know the reason why is because of what James says later on. He says you do not have because you don't ask. Most people in this world don't have wisdom because they've never asked God for it. They've asked Google. Or they asked AI. Which I will just tell you, I've asked AI many questions. It's not always right. A lot of times AI is confused itself. AI is not connected with the Spirit. Do we know that spiritual things are spiritually discerned? So if a dead human being can't comprehend spiritual things because they're dead spiritually, could a machine ever do it? No, it could not. We need the Holy Spirit of God for wisdom. And so many people don't have wisdom because they just don't ask God. They don't ask Him. They don't go to Him. But maybe you're saying, yeah, but I do ask God. I do ask God. And He says, you ask and don't receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. What does He mean by that? Well, maybe there is some certain point in your life where you would like the wisdom of God because you know that in acquiring it, it will help you to advance at work. It will help you to promote. It will help you to be more successful financially. It will help you in some way. And you say, God, I know you're the smartest person in the world. Just give me wisdom here. He says, you ask and you don't receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. He follows it up immediately with what he means. This is, someone the other day I was talking about James. He said, man, James punches hard. And he does. And the longer that I study the Bible, I'm thankful for those hard punches. They make me better. But James looks at his audience and he says this. And keep in mind that this is in a book where 2 chapters earlier he said that the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and then he says this. He says, because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. And then he says this, you adulterous people. What is adultery? Adultery is when you're in a covenant with one person in marriage, and you go and get in bed with somebody else that's not in your marriage. That's adultery. Now, by James calling these people adulterous, what he's saying is you're in covenant with the living God, and yet you are trying to be friends with the world. And he says by doing that, he says, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? The point is, God's not going to give his gift to an enemy. God's not going to give wisdom to an enemy. In church, there's one thing that I love about James is at one point in this epistle, he just says, but God gives more grace. And the point there is, maybe this is where you're sitting. Maybe right now you're sitting here this morning and God hasn't granted and he hasn't given wisdom. And the reason why is because you've been living 2 lives. You've lived this double kind of way. You hear the word and you say, man, that was a good word. That's a convicting word. And you walk out and you forget it. You're in church today, in the club tomorrow night. Or in the church today and just speaking like a worldly person at work tomorrow. No light, no leaven, no salt. Maybe that's you. God does give more grace. And God does not stop us from proceeding based on what happens to get us here. He does allow for us to move forward, but it comes with coming before God in repentance and saying, God, I'm going to live for you. So I just want to finish by spitting out 7 pieces of wisdom for you. These will not take long. Just let me give these to you, and then we will be finished. The first piece of wisdom is, you cannot love, this is 8 pieces of wisdom. You can't have the world and God. You can't have both. Jesus said you can't serve 2 masters. You'll hate the one and love the other, be devoted to one and despise the other. You have to pick one. Being on the fence belongs to the devil. You can't be on the fence. You have to pick one, and I'll tell you which one is of more value, supremely more value, and that's Jesus. Number 2, you need to fear the Lord. This is the beginning of wisdom, and it's repeated all through the Proverbs. Having a real fear of the Lord, and the word means fear. It doesn't just mean respect, like you would respect a superior at work. It does mean fear. He's a consuming fire. God is awesome. He's more powerful than we can fathom. There's wisdom in learning to fear him and saying, God has my life in his hands. I don't want to kick against him. So fear the Lord, that's the beginning of wisdom. Number 3, what did Jesus say was the greatest command in all the Bible? To love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. The key word there is what? All. And James is here describing a person who's double-minded. That means they're loving God with how much of their mind? Half of it, maybe even less. The greatest command we could ever have is to, look, we're not going to be perfect. You're going to fail. I fail every day with my speech. You're going to fail, that's fine, but which direction is your life going? It ought to be, God, I love you with every bit of me, with all my heart, with all my mind. I'm going to start my day thinking about you. I'm going to finish my day by talking to you about what happened that day. Give him all of you. You will fail, and that's where God gives more grace. But make your life focus in one direction. Love him with all of you. Church, Jesus is going to come back. And the thing that always strikes me is Jesus said, there are many who call me Lord, to whom I'll say, I didn't ever know you. And when I was young, I thought Jesus is talking about all the other churches. And after studying the Bible, sometimes I think, and often I think, most often I think, maybe he's talking about me. I don't want to be one for whom Jesus doesn't know. Number 4, welcome the hard wisdom and do the hard things. Welcome the hard wisdom and do the hard things. Even if the wisdom of God is saying you need to live on less in order to devote more time to your family and to your home and to the things that ultimately matter the most. You might have to cut down to one car. You might have to cut out cable. You might have to live on less. You might have to eat lower quality. Look, what is at stake? Let the wisdom of God teach you to do the hard things. Number 5, live not by how close you can toe the line, but rather ask God what is best. It's not, well, I know that God doesn't command me against this, so I'm just going to get right up here to the edge. It's, God, what's best? And I'm going to do what's best. Number 6, hang around people. I mentioned this the other night, but hang around people who are wiser than you and better than you. That's a good thing. Because when you hang around people that are wiser than you and better than you, it makes you better, and you learn to think like them. I'm just going to say this with the thing that interests me is, this is just an object lesson. Mark Zuckerberg is changing a lot of the ways that he thinks because he's grappling on an MMA floor regularly. What does that tell you? The people we hang around, that does inform the way we think. Number 7, read the Proverbs often. Read them daily if you can. And number 8, beg God for wisdom every day. Just go to him first thing in the morning and say, God, give me your wisdom. I need it. And then heed whatever it is that he gives you. God is a good God. He loves you more than you can imagine, and this is about us trusting in that word. If you have any need at all, if you wish to give your life to Jesus, if you wish to confess to him, you can let that be known while we stand and while we sing.